Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Mintz, we host Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern and share it as the Madlik podcast on your favorite platform. Last year, in an episode called You Are Not My Boss, we focused on the Torah's distaste for the people's desire to have a king. Today we'll explore an alternative leadership model, which is actually the name of the Torah portion. The parsha is called Shoftim, and Shofet, normally translated as a judge, can also be a decision maker or person of action. So join us as we discuss the meaning of Shofet and explore a past and promised age of Shoftim in our episode called Restore Our Judges. So welcome back from Paris, Rabbi, and welcome everybody. As I said, we do record this. It will be a podcast, and if you do listen to the podcast, make sure that you give us a star and give us a like and share it with your friends and family. But as I said, this parsha begins in Deuteronomy in 16:18, and it says, "You shall appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes in all the settlements that your God is giving you, and they shall govern the people with due justice. You shall not judge unfairly, you shall not show partiality, you shall not take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. Justice shall you pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that your God is giving you." So in the parsha, it has the famous tzedek tirdof, and it starts by saying, "Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha." So judges and law is so seminal to Judaism. We are a people of lawyers. It's one of the chosen professions. We talked a little bit in the pre-show about the impact of Maimonides, who was a doctor, but certainly law was such an important part of the Jewish psyche. I am the head of a 100-year organization that was started by Louis Brandeis, who, along with Justice Cardoza, were two absolutely famous Jewish Supreme Court justices, and they did more than just sit on the bench. Louis Brandeis was so involved as a Zionist that there is a town named after him in Israel called Ein HaShofet. So Rabbi, what is your first impression when you are given the word Shofet and tzedek tirdof?
So I think that your connection to last year's class about king is very much related. You see, there are different models of leadership. King is an absolute ruler. Shofet, tzedek tirdof, is a different kind of ruler. Tzedek tirdof is really saying that we have judges who carry out God's desire. God remains the ultimate authority, and the judges are under God. But when you have a king, the king seems to take the place of God. That's the difference between a melech, a king, and a shofet, a judge.
I love that. And I love the fact that we both seem to be on the same page, that we are talking about alternative leadership roles. There's the king and there's the judge, and they are different, and they relate to the people differently, and they relate to God differently. If we scroll down a little bit in the parsha and we go to Deuteronomy 17:8 through 9, it says, "If a case is too baffling for you to decide, be it a controversy over homicide, civil or assault, matters of dispute in your courts, you shall promptly repair to the place that your God has chosen and appear before the Levitical priests or the magistrate in charge at the time and present your problem when they have announced to you the verdict in the case. So here we get even a third role of leadership. It says that you should come to Ba'ata el HaKohanim HaLeviim ve'el HaShofet. So, it seems to me that even at this preliminary stage, a Shofet is more than just a judge. He's a leader. And from that perspective, you can bundle Shofet with words like priest and Levi. You're basically coming to people that make decisions. You're coming to people that have leadership roles. And I think that's really the path that I want to explore this evening, is looking at the Shofet in a much broader lens as a leader, and then kind of exploring how is that leadership different than kingship, for instance, or other types of things. But how does it strike you that you would bunch a
So
Shofet and a Levi and a Cohen in the
good.
same
So
sentence?
you're bringing up again an amazing point. The impression you get from the Chumash is that the Kohen and the Levi used to be the Shoftim. They themselves used to be the judges. If that's true, I can't prove it necessarily, but if that's true, what you see is that there was a connection between religious leadership and judicial leadership. The judges were the religious leaders. That's not the way we have it today. Obviously, you talked about Judge Brandeis and Judge Cardozo. They happen to be Jewish. What you didn't tell everybody was that when I don't know who the president was then, Woodrow Wilson, I think, who nominated Brandeis to be the Supreme Court justice, there was big opposition, ironically led by the New York Times, that said that Brandeis could not be a Supreme Court justice because there was a conflict of interest. They were afraid that his Judaism would influence his decisions. Can you believe that? His Judaism would influence his decisions. Now, the New York Times lost, and he was one of the great justices we ever had. But that's what they said. And you see in the Chumash that it's exactly the opposite, that the Kohanim actually were the judges.
I think that's fascinating. It is also interesting. I think there's a very high percentage of Roman Catholics who are justices. And I think, and of course, President Kennedy came up against the same challenge because the Catholic religion is so legalistic in many senses as well. But just to finish up, because I think I want to explore some verses that touch upon some of the things we've been talking about. In Deuteronomy 19, which I believe is next week's parsha, it says, the two parties to a dispute shall appear before God, before the priests or Shoftim, the magistrates, in authority at the time, and the magistrates shall make a thorough investigation if the one who testified is a false witness, having testified falsely against a fellow Israelite. So we do have, and I think the aspect of religion that definitely, blatantly, clearly impacts the law, an oath in the name of the Lord. And of course, we have that even till today. So I do think it's fascinating how religion and justice are kind of partners and have a synergy between them. But I think there's one aspect that I want to touch upon that we touched upon a few weeks ago. If you recall, Rabbi, we had an episode on challah. And we talked about terumah, that you had to take the challah you had to take a portion off of the challah and give it to the Kohen. And you told me, and you said, but Geoffrey, it doesn't say anywhere in the verse Kohen. It says you should give it to God. So I was struck by that, and in a sense, we have an instance where the priests are referred to as God. So it was understood by those who read the text that when it says you shall give the piece of the challah To God, it meant to God's representatives, in a sense, to the Kohanim. But what is equally fascinating is that many times judges are also referred to as God. So in Exodus 21, it says, "But if the slave declares, 'I love my master and my wife and children, I do not wish to go free,' his master shall take him before God, and he shall have his ear pierced." And Rashi on Exodus 21, 5 and 6 says, "El ha-Elohim," to God, means to the court. In Exodus 22, it says, "If the thief is not caught, the owner of the house shall depose before God and deny laying hands on the other's property." He says, "V'nikra ha-balabayit el ha-Elohim." And Rashi again says, the judges. So it is fascinating that the two groups that we have focused on in counter disposition to a king who, as you said, replaces God, the Kohanim and the judges are actually referred to God. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that is great. I mean, the word Elohim is the same word for judges and God. Now, probably that reflects God to say that one of the roles that God has is that he's a judge. But it also means that the judge has the status of God. That, that you see justice. You started the class tonight by quoting the pasuk Tzedek Tzedek Tirdof. We should pursue justice. Now, it sounds to me like that's a kind of secular comment, right? Pursue justice. But the truth of the matter is that that's a religious statement. Pursue justice is religious. You need to pursue justice in a religious way. Justice is defined in a religious way. And that's brought out by the fact that the judges are also connected to God and connected to the Kohen and to the Levi.
I think that you could easily make a case that, in a sense, that you go to a Cohen, you go to a judge with a difficult case, and you're almost kind of consulting with an oracle. And that would be the association with calling them God. You could make the case that they are representatives, the human representatives of God. And that's why you call them God. And finally, and I intimated this before, you could say that you actually do have to swear in the name of God. And that's why it says that you are approaching God. But I have a kind of a humanistic way of looking at it. And that would be that the way you started, you were saying that our challenge with kings is that they want to replace God. And I think that these leaders are as close to B'Tselem Elokim, the image of God. They do represent God, and that in a sense, our leaders are those people that are active in the community and are trying to decipher what the right and moral way is, are in fact those people that are imbued with God. Those are, in the words of Eric Fromm, those are the people who are following the dictate of "you shall be as gods." So I do think that we are talking not only about leadership alternatives, but leadership that is totally condoned by the Torah. And it's condoned because these people are trying as best they can as humans to represent, to channel the Lord in this world.
I think that's right. And I think it goes both ways, which is so great, right? It's that they're like God and God is like the judges. We look at God as a judge. There are two elements of God. There's one element of God as being a compassionate God. And there's another element of God as God being a righteous God, or God being the God of justice. Now, God being the God of justice is a kind of scary God. There's a wonderful midrash that's reflected in the Rosh Hashanah davening when it talks about the Akedah. The Akedah is when God commands Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac on the altar. And God at the last minute changes his mind. And what the Midrash says is that Abraham said to God, you're acting like the God of justice. I want you to become the God of compassion. And if that's what we all do on Rosh Hashanah, we try to turn the God of justice into the God of compassion. That's a really interesting idea.
It's not the focus of tonight's discussion, but there are so many commentaries on why it says tzedek, tzedek tiradov, justice, justice shall you pursue. And certainly one of them, the most beautiful in my mind, is that you need to pursue justice with justice. And I think that's kind of what you were referring to, that the strict law of justice, well, maybe that's easy to do, but to do it in a fair way, to do it in a compassionate way, to see the bigger picture, maybe that's why it says tzedek, tzedek twice. But I want to get back to Shoftim. And those of us who pray 3 times a day and say the 18 benedictions, the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, we talk about the Shoftim 3 times a day. There is one of the 18 benedictions says, Hashiva Shoftenu kivirishona v'yoatzenu k'vatchila. Restore our judges as before and our counselors as at first. Remove sorrow and sighing from us and reign over us, God, alone with kindness and compassion, and make us righteous with justice. And then it says, blessed are you, O God, who is full of compassion and justice. So in this one prayer, is a lot to unpack because it helps us make the transition from looking at a Shofet as simply a judge to something that is a whole lot bigger. Because it's clear in the big scope of history that when it says bring back our judges and our counselors, it's actually referring to a period in our history. The beginning of the book of Ruth says, and it was in the days of the Shoftim. It was in the days of the judges. There are 2 books of the Bible called Judges 1 and Judges 2 that come before the book of Samuel and the book of Malachim, which is the book of Kings 1 and 2. So there is a whole period, call it a period that we can romanticize, that we want to return to. Call it what you will, but it was a period that was ruled by Shoftim. And I think you would agree with me that the Shoftim that it's referring to are not simply magistrates sitting on a bench adjudicating. These were our leaders. And so this is a fascinating blessing, least of which it precedes a number of blessings that talk about bringing back the Davidic line and bringing back Jerusalem. It's part of the whole eschatology of ending our suffering and bringing back a new age. And it starts with Shoftim. What does this blessing mean to you?
Oh boy. So now you bring up a really interesting thing. That blessing, Hashiva Shoftayich Kvarishona v'yoatzayich Kevatchila, is actually a blessing in the Shemona Esrei, in the order of the blessings in the Shemona Esrei. That blessing comes right before V'Yerushalayim Yircha B'Rachamim Tashuv, that we go back to Jerusalem. It seems to be in the idea of the editor or the author of the Amidah that part of return to Jerusalem is a return to justice the way that it used to be. We can't return to Jerusalem without a return to justice. Wow, that's great, right? Who would have thought that? But that seems to be what it's saying. And it's Hashiva Shavtayik Varishona. It's almost like a messianic prayer. We want judges like we used to have judges. Then we're going to have a messianic reality. So this really elevates the idea of justice. This isn't just that that the judges are the ones who are going to be fair and all these things. It's that's part of the messianic vision. That's what we don't have now, which is kind of this symbiotic relationship between judges and God and religion and tzedek, all of these things together. I'll just say the word tzedek tirdof. The word tzedek is a great word because we always love talking about words, because the word tzedek is related to another word that we know. That word is the word tzedakah. Usually you think of tzedakah as charity, as something that you volunteer to do. Tzedek, on the other hand, righteousness, is something that you're obligated to do. And what you see is that you're obligated to be good. That's why we choose the word tzedakah. It's not that being good is not something that is voluntary in tradition. It's part of the obligation. You need to be good. That's what tzedek tirdof means.
The prayers that we say every day, they don't come out of a vacuum. And this prayer has beautiful language that you referenced about returning us to the days of old. And it really comes from the most beautiful haftorah that we say, I would say, all year. And it's on Shabbat Chazon, which Chazon means vision. And it comes from Isaiah 1:1, the prophecies of Isaiah, who prophesies concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And these are the prophecies where Isaiah says, I don't want your sacrifices. I take no joy in the bulls or delight in the goats. He goes, bringing oblations is futile. New moon and Sabbath for claiming solemnities for your assembly, I cannot abide. He's putting down all ritual, and he says, what I need is for you to wash yourselves clean. Put your evil doings away from my sight. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Devote yourself to justice. Aid the wrong. Uphold the rights of the orphan. Defend the cause of the widow. And then he goes on to say, your rulers are rogues and cronies of thieves. Everyone avid for presents and greedy for gifts. They do not judge the case of the orphan, and the widow's cause never reaches them. Assuredly, this is the dedication of the Lord, mighty one of Israel. I will get my satisfaction from my foes. I will wreak vengeance on my enemies. I will turn my hand against you and smelt you out. And then it says, I will restore your magistrates of old and your counselors of yore. After that, the city of righteous, faithful city, Zion, shall be saved. So exactly as you said, this is the context of this prayer. They lifted, they paraphrased, they took the exact words of Isaiah, but it really puts doing the right thing above all else, all of the ritual, all of the mouth services, all of the temple worship. It's one of the most profound messages, and it all is triggered from corrupt leaders, corrupt judges, and judges of old. It is absolutely powerful, is it not?
It is. I wonder why it is that the judges were so corrupt. Why is it that the book of Shoftim is the wrong model of leadership? You never would have guessed it from this week's parsha. This week's parsha, Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol she'arecha, sounds as if we should make judges that's a good model of leadership. Where do you come up with this idea that they were bad? Isn't that interesting?
So I'm not sure. I'm going to part roads with you. I think that Isaiah was talking literally about the judges as we know them in the day of the period before the destruction of the temple. I think when he says restore the Shoftim of old, yes, he's referring back to the time of the Shoftim. And like I did last week, I went back and I opened up Shoftim and I read it anew, and I do believe that there was a little bit of a golden age there. It was very strange. Joshua dies, and there are literally 12 judges, one of who is Deborah, the judge. And I say the word judges, I'm going to speak about them now as Shoftim, because they were not judges in the way we've been using the word. They were decision makers. They were people of action, and I think that's how they can best be described. They were not necessarily the person who would sit in the front pew of a synagogue. One of them was missing an arm, and he went ahead and killed the enemy by coming in to request a private meeting. Deborah was a warrior. I think, and this is the challenge for us. Not that Isaiah was putting them down, or the prayer that I just referenced from the Shmona Esrei puts them down, but in a sense, it does talk about these very human people who, we grow tired of saying this, that the Torah always talks about even our greatest heroes have fallacies and limitations. But I think what you do when you read the book of Shoftim, and it's all in the Sephirah notes, is there's a cycle. The people have a Shofet, and he rules for 12 years, and then he dies, or he gets killed, and the people start eating off the land, and all they care about is wealth. All they care about is agriculture. They don't even care enough to defend themselves. These Shoftim, more than anything else, are people that defended the people. I think that Josephus, believe it or not, kind of paratrates and characterizes the Shoftim best. He says, after this, the Israelites grew effeminate as to fighting any more against their enemies, but applied themselves to the cultivation of the land, which producing them great plenty and riches, they neglected the regular disposition of the settlement. They stopped building armies. They started protecting themselves. And they also, yes, went into idolatry. And then a Shofet would come, and he would be a Shofet for 40 years. And then they would fall into the same thing. It was almost, I talk about a Shofet as people of action, because I think that what the sin of the people really was that they were inactive, that they were just satisfied with the status quo. And that, to me, is the read I've gotten from looking at the book of Shoftim this week, which is a fascinating read. It's a fascinating period in our history that we don't really know, we don't talk about.
So that's interesting. I mean, and the answer, the reason we don't talk about that period in our history is because it was an unsuccessful period in our history, and it was undone with the introduction of kingship. First King Saul, who was a great king. I mean, he failed, but he was a great king. And then, of course, there was King David. So what you're saying is that really the Shoftim, their problem was that the form of leadership of a Shofet is to take the reality as it is and to work with it. And sometimes that just isn't good enough. Sometimes you need a king who can actually change the reality. That's really good.
And I think the other part about it is, on the one hand, it was a failed period, and on the other hand, 3 times a day we talk about returning us to the period
to
of the
that period, right? That's correct. So that's so. So you could say depends. Judges are as good as judges can be. But I think there's a very important piece, the religious piece that you brought up about the fact that Elohim means both a judge and means God. There's something messianic about judges.
I think there's something messianic, and it is one of the few blessings that we change during the 10 days of repentance, during the 10 holidays.
We
We
emphasize Hamelech. There it's
Hamelech
Hamelech
HaMishpat.
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 Because king, because the 10 days, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, it's about God being king. God, we don't say God is the judge, though that's there, obviously, but it's God being the king. That's
Yeah,
also something to think about. Why on Rosh Hashanah is God king and not God judge? God obviously could be both. Why do we choose one and not the other? I don't know the answer. It's a good question.
yeah. I mean, my sense is that God has to become king because he has to reclaim the title from humankind, that there are humans who wish to steal it. God being a judge, I think he can live with judges who represent him. I think there's a lot more synergy, I think, between God as a judge and human judges than there is as God as a king and a human king, where there's really only one seat at the throne. But I think it's a fascinating takeaway, and I think I am continue to be intrigued, and I will take it with me for the Shabbat, that we want to return to a failed period where at least we were struggling with these issues, and as importantly, that we celebrate people, men, women, Deborah, Samson, people of action. And that the worst thing is to grow where we don't care. We go callous, not only to the orphan and the widow, but even to our own needs of moving forward, protecting our families, and so forth and so on. And all we want to do is harvest our crop.
I think that's great. This was a great choice, and it's really something to think about. Something to think about this Shabbos, and something to think about as we approach Rosh Hashanah. So, thank you so much. Thank you for leading this class from the car, and after enjoying a great day at the Open. And we want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Enjoy the parsha, enjoy the holiday weekend, and we look forward to seeing everybody next week to talk about Parshat Ki Teitzei. Be well, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, everybody.